Todd McFarlane himself has stated that this is his definitive Batman, and I feel like a little bit of those biases has seeped into the figure in more ways than one. For a while, I stayed away from collecting any sort of Adam West Batman because I felt like whatever McFarlane was releasing up until this point just really didn't suffice as far as those 6-inch figures that I just didn't feel like they had the quality that was up to par with the rest of the DC multiverse. I understand that they're leaning a little bit more towards the nostalgic side, the DC Direct side, but they were a little limited on the articulation. They weren't to scale, kind of favoring the whole 6-inch manner as opposed to being a proper 7-inch DC multiverse figure. I even kind of dabbled with it a few times. There was one lunchbox set in particular that I actually picked up as a Target exclusive, and they ended up breaking. The Adam West in that collection, in fact, ended up being one of the defective figures, and I took that as a sign from the action figure gods to be like, all right, you know what? Return it and forget about it. Just wait until McFarlane eventually releases a proper release under the DC Multiverse brand, and lo and behold, here in 2024, we finally got that with a proper 7-inch scale DC Multiverse release of the Adam West 1966 classic TV show Batman, which is quite an awful lot to say for me since this is technically, I'm sorry, but I'm just gonna say it, if you couldn't already tell from my current age group that I happen to fall into, this is not necessarily my definitive Batman. I mean, it may be for Todd McFarlane, but the irony is that this is probably the most disconnected portrayal of Batman that I've ever had as far as the actors. But it makes sense because he's from the 60s, he's way before my time, and I understand the cultural significance behind Adam West's take on the character. But in terms of like the camp, the whole campy, very pulpy nature of the character, it never really sat with me. I was never able to really go in and be like, yeah, I can accept for what it is. I just grew up a little bit more on the darker tone that Burton was able to kind of set for the character with either Keaton under the 2 movies that he did or with the Schumacher films that he produced. And then from there, we had the revelation, at least through my eyes, of what Nolan was able to take with the character, and the rest wasn't really the same. But for many that are huge diehard fans of the Adam West character, we finally have this version that can now scale better with the rest of the DC Multiverse brand and still be able to give us a fresh new figure, which is probably one of the more enthralling things that I was able to take away from this figure, is that not only do we have a brand new version to now be able to kind of scratch that itch of having a DC Multiverse Adam West, but a brand new figure to boot, because I'm telling you, some recent releases have been mostly repaints, retools, things like that. And I want to say for like 90% of it, this is a brand new figure to favor the Adam West. And I guess you could say that that's probably come to be expected since Todd McFarlane loves this guy so much that he probably said, as a note, make this guy mostly new. And I can feel that coming across specifically around the chest area and the bulk of the sculpting that's going on with the arms and the limbs. There may be a little bit of DNA kind of taken over from some previous bucks and some previous models that kind of set the blueprint for what's to go on here, especially when it comes to articulation. But at least I see that everything is just kind of tooled and pieced together in a way that I can look at this character and I don't think of any other figure that it's lifting from. It feels like its own portrayal, its own physique, its own buck, and it makes sense since this is Adam West. He's not necessarily the most bulky, beefy Batman that we've ever had, and that's emulated very well with the way that the sculpting for the biceps and the very straight and narrow, kind of lanky physique that he's got going on with, I'm sorry, I don't mean this as an insult, but the lack of musculature, if anything, it's favoring the figure in this sense. And the way they were able to tailor the suit, so to speak, as far as sculpting out the way that it comes across on the chest area, specifically of how, for lack of a better term, plain it looks there. I mean, when Adam West wore the suit, it was very bare as far as the way it's just kind of stretching across his chest, his abdomen, and they were able to do that very well here, while at the same time giving him just a bit of definition there around the chest area, but also the specific color scheme and hue they used for the gray is very much lifted from the suit that he wore in the 60s, as well as the way that it's coming across on the thighs and the legs, the lower leg area, and then most especially the little standout details to kind of favor that campiness, specifically the utilization of yellow for both the bat symbol that's very crudely put and stamped right there in the front and center of his chest emblem, but also at the same time the belt, which is very garish and oversized, but that's the way that it was in the show. So and that's not a mark on the figure. If anything, that's very faithful and very well done as far as the way that it's sculpted. And if anything, it's actually really well done as far as the paint application for the reflective gold paint app that you come across right there on the front of the belt. The only area that even I, not being the biggest fan of the 66 Batman, can kind of pick apart from this figure would have to be the specific hue of blue they used for either the diaper piece, the gauntlets, boots, and then specifically the cowl. I mean, even I can tell that this blue is a little on the inaccurate side. It's leaning more so towards a turquoise kind of shade. So yeah, that's the only thing that I'll definitely mark some points. Even like I said, having come across this portrayal of Batman on TV occasionally, and then of course images online, posters, etc. I'm like, yeah, the blue was a bit more on the saturated baby blue kind of look to his suit, depending on the episode. But here, it just looks like maybe something was mistranslated as far as the paint applications. And it's a shame to see that also come across on the cowl, which is really well done as far as the way that they got the Adam West likeness, the way that the mouth plate is painted and sculpted, the little details behind the cowl to not only kind of have this little darker shade at the front, just like it was in the TV show with the little eyebrows and the nose kind of painted on, but even some additional little details that they didn't really have to do. Like you have these strange little stitchings that they sculpted into the mold right underneath the ear and kind of at the top of the head to then connect to the front of the cowl. It's a nice little additional touch that I can really respect. But like I said, it's just a shame that you see that it's the wrong shade of blue. And I feel like nothing calls more attention to that than the cape, which of course you can see right here. It is a nylon fabric cape, which I really wish I would have done the cloth version here, because out of all the characters, you would think that the Adam West one would come with cloth, but at the same time, I can see why they went with nylon, because at least it's kind of creating that reflective sheen that his original suit and furthermore, his original cape did in fact have. Every time you saw him on screen, this thing would be super reflective up in the lighting, especially with all the amount of lights that they had on set. And so this is technically, as far as accuracy is concerned, how it was in the show. So it's cool to see that the nylon is bringing in that effect. But you can see here that this is the correct shade of blue that the rest of the blue on his figure is supposed to be. So it's contrasting towards the actual shade that he's got on the plastic, and that's a huge shame. But you can see right here, it is that fabric, and once again, it's pleated on the edges with this really formidable wire that is allowing the cape to kind of structure and bend to your liking, but at the same time, doesn't feel weak, doesn't feel feeble, it feels very quality. The only thing I'll remark, I'm sorry, but is it just me, or is this thing stitched kind of terribly? It's a little too long here towards the middle. Towards the sides, I can see it, and it's actually done very well, but it's once we get to the center, despite the end trims having the, kind of like the hoops right here and the arcs to kind of emulate the Batman look, I just think that this center here is just way too long, that it just kind of drags here on the floor no matter how many times I try to sculpt it. And kind of the only way to have it avoid dragging on the floor is to then bend the wires to make it look like it's kind of flowing and flapping in the air, in the wind, so to speak. I don't know if Todd is trying to overcompensate from a man here, or again, it's his favoritism towards the Adam West Batman, but yeah, I really wish that this would have been stitched a little higher. It's a little distracting to see Batman dragging such a huge cape, especially when I'm pretty certain that the Adam West portrayal on the TV show had a much shorter cape, one that almost kind of cut off here towards the areas where his knees are, kind of similar to that of the Christopher Reeve Superman, who had a much shorter cape than the Superman that came after him. So I don't know why they decided to go for a longer cape, especially when I know that there's another Platinum Chase figure out there that's making the rounds at certain Walmarts with a much shorter cape that almost makes me think should have been swapped for Adam West here, but that's just a tinfoil hat theory for now. What is no conspiracy, however, is the articulation, which is really well done considering that, like I said, for the most part, we're dealing with a brand new buck in a new physique. The head is able to rotate 360 degrees, though I think it's a little bit on the lacking side when it comes to tilting. Can't really look up too well as being able to kind of bend downwards, and tilting is a little bit on the limited side, especially when you're dealing with a dancing Batman that will be able to dance a little bit more funky like later on when we tackle accessories. So I really wish that he could have been a little bit more emotive when it comes to the head joint, but at least the arms are really well done as far as the joint inside that allows mobility of being able to turn the arm 360 vertically, no problem. Extension towards the sides is pretty good, as you can see right there. And if the little washers kind of shifting in place don't give it away, you have an awful lot of really good 360 mobility in any kind of direction there, whether it be butterfly movement forwards and backwards, as well as shrugging upwards and downwards. Unlike the 6-inch Batman, Adam West Batman DC Direct figures that we were having in the past. So this is exactly why I was waiting on so long to get a proper DC Multiverse Adam West. Because not only can you do that there, but you also got the biceps that are able to fully rotate 360. And considering that there's very little bicep to speak of with Adam West, I'm sorry, you're able to not only turn it, no problem, but also bend at the elbows, 2 joints upwards like that, easy peas. The wrists are also sporting the joint that I really like to allow the hands to fully rotate 360, as well as being able to bend inwards and outwards, no problem. And even though it's a little on the skinnier side when it comes to the torso, it can still rotate the full 360, no problem at the mid-torso cut. Extension towards the back is actually pretty good, as you can see right there. It kind of separates just a tiny bit. But crunching inwards, it kind of stops a little dead when it comes to the 180 plank. So do be careful with that. Can't really crunch inwards all too well. Crunching towards the sides on the obliques is not too bad, but again, extension and crunching towards the front is really where it's kind of a little bit on the limited side. Even with the waist joint in there, it can't really cause any further mobility forwards, as you can see right there. It can kind of extend towards the back a little further due to the waist, and technically if you get your thumbs in there, you can rotate at the waist, but because of how massive that belt really is and it's kind of encroaching on the entirety of the joint, you can't really fully rotate. It can kind of nudge side to side, so I really don't want to risk it because I feel like it can rotate 360 at the waist, but it's going to cause a little bit of warping on the plastic and the rubber for the crotch piece, the diaper, as well as the belt itself. And considering how clean he's looking, I really don't want to risk that just yet. But the top leg joints can definitely flex forwards pretty well as far as that far in terms of degrees, and extension towards the back is actually pretty decently, but just mind the little bit of gap that it forms right there at the top of the leg. And extension towards the sides is also pretty decent, though do be careful with the ratchetiness of the joints in there. It kind of, I don't want to crack on mine. It did do like a little bit of a snapping noise, but just be careful. It can do it there. And the knees are able to bend upwards, no problem, even though it's actually the knees where I do feel like I've seen this joint, or at least this specific piece, a couple times before. It's probably the only area that I can look at the figure and be like, you look familiar. I feel like I've seen you guys there before, but I digress. Once we move further down with the boots, you can see right here that we once again got the joint that I really do like, so much respect to the flush ankle joint that feels natural to the boot, allows the foot to be able to bend downwards and upwards in a ratcheted position, no problem, as you can see right there. Full rotation 360 without having to resort to pivoting at the top of the joint, but you can still pivot at the bottom of said joint, and then the toes are naturally able to bend upwards. So you see right there that the articulation is pretty standard for a McFarlane figure, but it's good to see that it can still come across very well, not too loose, not too firm on a figure that is, for the most part, like I said, with the exception of my suspicions on the knee joints, because like I said, they look a little familiar. I can't put my finger on it, but at least for the majority of the figure that is more or less brand new for a fresh take on the character, it's good to see that the joints, even though, like I said, they don't do anything to kind of blow the competition out of the water, they're still able to do an adequate job of giving Adam West some flexibility as far as positioning. But the detail, the sculpt, and even the cape weren't the only things that McFarlane may or may not have doubled down, considering his favoritism towards the Adam West Batman. He also packed in a couple of extra little additions into the package, the overall value proposition, both for better and for, I don't want to necessarily say worse, but questionable. Some of the kids these days would like to say sus, in a matter of speaking. As far as accessories, it's actually got some really good value packed in here as far as what's included, because naturally it's going to come with additional hands besides the gripping ones that he comes with on person. But I like that out of all the Batman out there, it's the one that was known for his campy, very outlandish nature, but very fresh take on the character that definitely required to have some sort of personality embedded into his hand accessory. So it's good to see that they didn't cut back on that. Because he comes with 2 additional pairs, none of which are fisted, which I think are a little bit on the interesting side, because I feel like maybe later down the line, McFarlane will kind of release a second version of this figure, either as a platinum, as a chase, even though there's already a platinum of this guy out there that's like in black and white. But I feel like eventually he's gonna come across one where he's gonna come with the fists, but then he's naturally gonna come with the little action bubbles, like the pow, bam. And that would make an awful lot of sense as a chase sort of variant. But as far as what's included here, he comes with an asymmetrical pair with one finger pointing in a very bendy manner. I don't believe that the index finger is designed to bend in that direction. So that's a little on the unnatural side, but at least, like I said, it's pointing and kind of favoring the personality a little bit there. But then over on his right, he's got what at first I thought was kind of like a holding hand between the index finger and the thumb. But from some pictures, I think it's meant to be more used in a pose to make him look like he's thinking, or he's got his hand holding his chin like he's thinking, because apparently he did that an awful lot in many of episodes when he was being the world's greatest detective, and nothing evoked the emotion of being a detective than to put your fingers like this up against your chin and go, So Adam West pantomimed that to no end, and it looks like this hand is designed to kind of replicate that position and almost immortalize it, but not as much as the infamous Batuzzi dance style. And this is what this second pair of hands is supposed to favor. You have these 2 hands that kind of look like peace signs, but if you know anything about 66 Batman, I didn't even watch it religiously, and even I know about the Batuzzi. All right, I know about Batuzzi. Make no mistake. And it's cool and awesome that McFarlane still managed to throw in these additional hand accessories to favor that pose. So you can bet your ass I'm going to be posing him a lot in that dance stance, and it's good to see that both hands, despite being sculpted a little bit differently, it looks like this one has kind of like a semi-open look to his gesture, but this one is more so like a peace sign. So you can either kind of mix and match, make it look like he's doing the Batuzzi, or you can make it look like he's doing his best Richard Nixon "I'm not a crook" impression. But Adam West's Batman was also not short on accessories. He naturally comes with a Batarang, which of course has this kind of like winged look. Unfortunately, it's got that turquoise look to the paint application they utilize, so it's a shame that it doesn't really match the accurate color scheme. But if anything, I guess this is probably the one that you would want to favor so that it looks a little bit more natural to the hands that he's holding it in. And I do find it kind of interesting that he's got a little hole perforation on one of the wings, so it makes me wonder if they originally wanted to throw in a little string to kind of attach it to some form of grapple gun or something, or to kind of replicate the famous walking up the building kind of shot, even though you can tell they're walking on a flat surface, on the floor, and they just tilted the camera. That, it's charming. I understand that it's charming. But yeah, it's interesting that that hole is in fact still there. So it looks like maybe at the last second they kind of ditched that idea when they knew that they needed to use some of that money, some of that budget towards a cape, maybe. That's my theory. But nevertheless, he still has a Batarang that he can hold in one of his hands. And then the other, he's got the Bat Radio, which, definitely is not necessarily my favorite accessory considering just how garish and large it is. At first, I didn't even know that this was the Bat Radio, but yeah, you can see right there that it's pretty much this flat piece of plastic with a little bit of orange and gray there in the middle, and it's supposed to be designed after what was the 60s impression of a portable radio. Oh, how little did they know. What I know is that when you put him like this, yeah, even a Batman that is just so before my time is still able to win me over in DC Multiverse format as far as the personality it's trying to evoke, the time it's kind of calling back to, and at the same time still being able to build upon a really well-made DC Multiverse figure. It almost makes me forget about the other very strange, no pun intended considering there's a Hugo Strange out there right now, inclusion inside of this specific Batman. Because if you could tell from the little bit of box B-roll you saw at the top of the review, you'll note that they are in fact performing a form of sweepstakes included with people's purchase of the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Adam West Batman, in which if you are able to pick this figure up, you get a code that you can then enter along with your information to then be submitted into the sweepstakes to win a replica cowl of the 66 Batman. So similar to the way that they're going to be releasing a 89 Keaton Batman cowl, 1-to-1 scale replica that you can technically not even wear in the first place, they're going to be doing a similar thing with Adam West, except you're not going to be able to purchase it. It's a sweepstakes, which is kind of interesting, all right? Kind of cool. You could enter to win a replica. But it's really strange and almost downright suspicious that in order to enter, you still need to be able, or at least a figure of the Adam West Batman needs to be purchased. Now, it's a little confusing to see an awful lot of times throughout the fine print. It keeps saying in bold letters, no purchase necessary. But then right after that, or I think right before that, it says that you need to enter the code that came with your quote-unquote purchase of the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Adam West Batman. So some people online were kind of debating this as to whether or not this is ethical, this is suspicious, and it is a little strange and a little scummy looking, but technically they can get away with this because you're not buying the code. That's how they can kind of get away with saying no purchase necessary, is because you're not buying the code, you're buying the figure, and the code just happens to be included. And the way that they're able to kind of skirt around this is because if I want to get super technical here, if I or someone that picked up the Adam West Batman and gets this code wants to give the code away to somebody else, then they can take the code, enter, and they'll still be entered. And they technically did not buy the figure. A figure was bought to achieve the code, to acquire the code, but they technically didn't buy a entry in doing so. They were given the code, and therefore that's where a little bit of those legalities come into play. It's like, oh, you technically didn't buy the code, you didn't buy the entry, you just bought the figure that just happens to come with the code, and that's how they're able to kind of tiptoe around that sort of thing. So is it a little on the surface level, on the optics level, kind of scummy looking? Admittedly, yes, because I was looking left and right trying to find a way to enter these sweepstakes without entering the code, scratching off the code, etc. And there's virtually no way around it. Every time I scanned the QR code, I tried to enter it for myself. It asked for that code. I tried entering my information without the code, kept going back to it saying, error, you need the code to be inputted in. They almost don't really remark on it. And that's where things are technically legal. But is it a little bit questionable as far as ethics is concerned? I think so. I feel like it should be a little bit more fair across the board as far as the acquisition of these codes, maybe by, going on social media and retweeting something, you're entered for a chance to win, or simply just entering the way that EQLs are done, where technically entering is free, you only get really charged when you win the figure or you win the cow, etc. But that's a whole nother beast entirely. I just know that some error needed to be cleared as far as this entry, because I saw a little bit of discourse on social media, and even I thought it was a little strange looking, but after doing a little bit of investigation, I can note that, yeah, technically they're in the clear, but it is a little strange, and it almost makes me think that sweetening the deal of Adam West out of all the versions of Batman with the sweepstakes, it just looks kind of tacky. Take the ethics out, it just looks a little strange and tacky, especially knowing that this sweepstakes doesn't even end until February, so you still have to wait almost a whole goddamn half a year to even know if you win. At that point, just know that inside of your possession, you got yourself a really well done DC Multiverse Adam West Batman, and if you're a fan of the character, that's an even added bonus. But even coming from someone who's not a major fan of this version of Batman, who's never been that connected to this version of the character, is way before my time, and it was just a little too late to jump on the bandwagon, I can still objectively say that this is a really well done DC Multiverse. I just really wish that they could have tailored back a little bit on the cape. But as far as what we do get for accessories and the personality that is just kind of beaming off this guy, it's a bit of a showstopper, and eventually did win me over in the end. Enough to give it a pretty modest 8 out of 10, and probably one of the highlights for at least the latter half of 2024 as far as McFarlane Batman releases are concerned. For now though, are you guys fans of the Adam West Batman? Did that resonate with your childhood? Did you grow up watching the TV series through reruns or syndication? Unfortunately, like I said, by the time that I started to watch TV regularly in that format, guess what I was watching? Batman the Animated Series. That's really where I'm at, and that's why I collect so much of the animated series, as far as the DC Direct stuff, the McFarlane's stuff, even some of the collectibles, even some of the goddamn Mondo toys, Hot Toys, what have you. And it's become a little bit of a problem for me. But what's your guys' Batman problem as far as collecting? Let me know down below. While you're down there, hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video, thumbs down if you did not. A massive thank you to our executive producers at the level 2 tier, Tom Bowling. And as always, stay humble. I'll see you guys later.